"Don't drink that, Mr. Harlow. Please, something is wrong with it." The words came from the far end of the long dining table, barely loud enough to carry over the sound of clinking crystal and polite conversation. But they carried. They always do, when a child says something no adult wants to hear. Bernard Harlow set the champagne flute down slowly. He was 63 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of posture that came from 4 decades of standing in courtrooms and boardrooms and never once letting anyone see him unsure of himself. Tonight was the celebration of his retirement, 40 years as one of the most respected senior partners at Harlow and Associates, the firm he had built from a single leased office in downtown Ottawa into one of the most recognized legal practices in the country. The private dining room at the Rideau Club had been reserved for months. 50 guests, all carefully chosen, colleagues, judges, old clients who had become friends and family. The little girl who had just spoken was 7 years old, with her hair in 2 neat braids and a deep green dress that matched napkins on the table. Her name was Nina, and she was the daughter of Priya Sandhu, the club's senior catering coordinator, who had spent the last 6 years managing events in this very room. Priya was already moving. Her face had gone pale. "Nina." Her voice was low and controlled in the way that only a parent who has been caught between a child and the wrong crowd knows how to make it. "Come here, baby. Come to Mama right now." But Nina did not move. She stood very still beside the drinks cart near the east wall, her small hands pressed flat against her sides. She was looking at the tall man across the table from Bernard Thomas Wren, Bernard's longtime legal partner, and by all appearances tonight, his closest friend. "She touched it," Nina said. "The lady with the ring, she put something in Mr. Harlow's glass, not the other one's. Just his." A ripple of uncomfortable silence moved through the table. Thomas Wren set down his own glass and leaned back in his chair with the patient, faintly tired expression of a man accustomed to managing difficult moments. He was 58, lean, with silver-rimmed glasses, and the sort of face that juries had found reassuring for 30 years. He looked at Nina the way experienced people sometimes look at a fire alarm. They are almost certain is a false one, briefly, with the calculation of a man weighing whether the inconvenience of evacuation was worth it. "Mr. Harlow," he said mildly, "I think the little one may be confused. Priya, perhaps she could wait in the kitchen?" Priya reached Nina and put both hands on her daughter's shoulders. "Sir, I am so sorry. She was supposed to be in the staff room." She looked down at Nina, something desperate behind her eyes. "Baby, you cannot be in here during service. We've talked about this." "I know," Nina said. "But I saw her, Nina. I was watching from the hallway because I wanted to see the pretty table. Then the lady came in before the servers finished. She went to the cart. She picked up Mr. Harlow's glass, the one with the little gold rim, the special one Mrs. Wren asked them to use, and she put something in from a bottle inside her clutch. Then she put it back in the same spot." A woman near the middle of the table leaned toward her husband and said very quietly, "Children get overexcited at these events." The man nodded without looking up from his bread plate. Someone else at the far end murmured, "She probably saw something on television." Bernard watched his granddaughter's age flash across Nina's face, that particular stiffening that children get when they realize the adults in the room have already decided not to believe them. It was not embarrassment. It was something older than that, and quieter, and much harder to watch. "Which lady?" Bernard asked. Nina looked across the table. Every eye in the room followed hers. Catherine Wren sat 4 seats to Bernard's left, in a dress the color of winter wheat, a strand of pearls at her throat, and a small cream-colored clutch resting on the table beside her water glass. She was 54, elegant, and had been Thomas I's wife for 26 years. She had also been the one to suggest the gold-rimmed glass, explaining to the catering staff 3 days ago that Bernard deserved something distinctive for the toast. "That lady," Nina said. Catherine pressed one hand lightly to her collarbone. Her expression did not break. It rearranged itself the way good china shifts slightly before it falls. "My goodness," she said softly. "I don't know what to say to that." Thomas leaned forward. "Bernard, I am deeply sorry. This is embarrassing, and I don't want it to color what has been a beautiful evening." "It should not be happening," said the woman beside him, Justice Harriet Osey, who had known Bernard for 20 years and had sat in silence long enough. She said it quietly, without drama, the way a woman who has spent a career weighing statements says things she means. Bernard looked down at the champagne flute in front of him. It was tall and narrow, with a small brushed gold band at the base of the bowl. Priya had placed it there at the instruction of Catherine Wren, who had been the one to liaise with the club about the event details, at Thomas's request, because, as Thomas had explained to Bernard 2 months ago, organizing parties was not something he enjoyed, and Catherine was so much better at these things. Bernard had thanked her for it. "Nina," he said carefully, "are you certain you didn't misunderstand what you saw?" Sometimes the servers add garnish, or they check the glasses for watermarks. No, sir. She had a little brown bottle. It didn't have a label on it. She turned her back to the door. I could only see from the side through the crack. Children have remarkable imaginations, Thomas said, and his voice had not changed at all, which Bernard noticed, because a man who loved you would have sounded more troubled. She does, Priya said, and her voice was shaking now. Nina, please. We'll talk about this in the back. Mama. Nina's face was very serious. He can't drink it. There was a small silence, and in that silence Bernard became aware that he was doing something he had not done in 40 years of high-stakes negotiation. He was stalling. He had not picked the glass back up because some part of him, the part that had built a career on reading rooms, had already heard something in the space between Thomas's words. Thomas was not alarmed. He was managing. Those were not the same thing. Bernard looked at his old friend. Thomas Bernard, please. Don't let a child's confusion ruin. I'm not speaking to the child. I'm speaking to you. Bernard kept his voice level. You organized this evening through Catherine. You chose the venue, the guest list, the menu. You suggested the toast happen before dinner rather than after. Oh, because I know you hate waiting through a 3-course meal for the part that matters. Yes. Bernard turned the champagne flute slowly in place without lifting it. You also know that I've been having headaches this month. You sent me an article 2 weeks ago about the dangers of mixing alcohol with the prescription I've been on. The table had gone very quiet. Thomas's expression remained composed. It was the expression Bernard had watched him use in depositions for 30 years, the face of a man who understood that whatever he said next was being recorded somewhere. I sent you that article because I was concerned about you. Were you Bernard? Thomas's voice tightened, just slightly, the way a rope tightens before it snaps. Think about what you are implying. In front of 50 people, on the night of your retirement. I'm not implying anything yet, Bernard said. I'm asking you to drink from my glass. The room went absolutely still. Catherine had not moved. Her hand was still resting near her clutch. She was watching Bernard with an expression that had become in the last 30 seconds very carefully neutral. Thomas laughed. It was a short laugh, the kind designed to make the other person feel foolish. This is absurd. Then it shouldn't trouble you, Bernard. Drink from my glass, Thomas. If the child is wrong, there is nothing in it, and we can all get back to the evening. Bernard said it the way he had once said things in closing arguments. Not loudly, not with anger, but with the specific weight of a man who has already decided where the sentence ends. Thomas did not reach for the glass. He didn't refuse it directly either. He began to speak. About the absurdity of the accusation, about his 30 years of loyalty, about the indignity of being challenged at his oldest friend's retirement dinner. He spoke the way people speak when they need time, and words are the only currency they have left. But he did not touch the glass. Justice Osei stood up from her chair. Bernard, she said, don't touch it either. She turned to the room. Is there anyone in this club tonight who can call the club manager and have this room closed? Now, please, nobody leave. 2 things happened at once. A young server near the back moved toward the door, and Catherine Wren quietly reached for her clutch with both hands, as though she intended to move it to her lap. Priya stepped forward, her voice soft and absolutely clear. Please don't touch that bag, Mrs. Wren. Catherine stopped. Nina, still standing beside her mother, watched Catherine's face. Later, she would tell Priya that the thing she remembered most was not the fear or the shouting that came after. It was the second when Mrs. Wren's hand stopped moving. Just stopped, in the middle of the air like a clock that had run out. The club manager arrived within 4 minutes. Bernard's longtime articling student, now a junior partner, had already taken photographs of the glass and its position on the table before anyone asked him to. Justice Osei, who had been an prosecutor before her appointment to the bench, began speaking quietly to the most senior server, about which members of staff had been present when the drinks cart was arranged. Bernard sat through it all with his hands on the table and the untouched champagne flute 3 inches from his right hand. Nina had been moved to a chair near the service door, where Priya sat beside her with one arm around her shoulders. Nina had her head down. She was not crying. She was doing what children do when they have said everything they know how to say, and the adults have, finally, started moving. She was breathing. Thomas spoke twice more in that first hour. The first time, he tried to suggest that the investigation was premature and the accusation was based on the testimony of a child in a hallway. The second time, he asked whether he and Catherine could wait in a private room. Justice Osei said no to both. The champagne flute was taken away in a sealed evidence bag by an RCMP officer who arrived 40 minutes later. The cream clutch was taken as well. The brown bottle inside it was small, pharmaceutical in shape, and had no label. The officer who logged it said nothing about what it might be, but the way he handled it, carefully, with two hands, and by the very edges, told Bernard everything he needed to know about whether Nina had been confused. Bernard was taken to hospital as a precaution, because his prescription made certain substances more dangerous than they would have been otherwise, and because the attending officer advised it, and because for the first time in 40 years, Bernard Harlow did not argue with the professional standing in front of him. His daughter, Simone, met him at the emergency entrance. She was 41, a radiologist in Halifax, and she had flown into Ottawa that morning specifically for tonight. She walked beside his wheelchair with her hand on his arm and said almost nothing, which was how Bernard knew she was frightened. In the waiting room of the Queensway Carlton, the guests who had stayed, Justice Osei, the junior partner, two of Bernard's oldest colleagues, sat in the rows of plastic chairs and spoke in low voices. Priya and Nina sat a little apart near the window. Nina still had her green dress on. She had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder, with her mouth slightly open and one shoe half off her foot. Simone noticed them when she came out of the hallway for a cup of water. She stopped. "Is that the little girl?" she asked Justice Osei. "Yes." Simone walked over and sat down in the chair across from Priya. She said, "I'm Bernard's daughter." Priya looked at her carefully. "I'm so sorry this happened, Miss Harlow. Nina wasn't supposed to be in the room." "I know." Simone was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad she was." Priya's face didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. Nina stirred, registered the new voice, and opened her eyes. She looked at Simone with the frank, evaluating look that very young children direct at strangers when they have not yet learned to soften it. "Is your dad okay?" Nina asked. "He's stable," Simone said. "The doctors say he's going to be okay." Nina nodded, serious and small. Then she put her head back against her mother's shoulder and closed her eyes again. Bernard was admitted overnight for observation and released the following morning with a prescription adjustment and a follow-up appointment scheduled for Thursday. He was told that the interaction between his existing medication and the substance in the glass, had he drunk it, would likely have produced what most attending physicians would initially have described as a cardiac event. He was told this by a doctor who was younger than his articling students and who spoke with the particular gentleness that young doctors learn when the news is good but the near miss is close. "How close?" Bernard asked. The doctor looked at him. One glass would probably have been enough. Bernard thanked him. Then he sat for a while in the hospital room, looking out at the October sky over Ottawa, and thought about 30 years. He and Thomas Wren had met in their first year at the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law. They had articled at the same firm. They had started Harlow and Associates together. Bernard's name on the door because he had the client relationships. Thomas's name in the founding documents because Bernard had believed, without ever questioning it, that what was his was also in some measure Thomas's, that the partnership was a shared thing. 3 weeks before the retirement dinner, Bernard had signed papers transferring his remaining equity stake in the firm to a newly structured partnership trust. He had done it because Thomas had presented the restructuring as a tax efficiency measure, and because he trusted Thomas, and because 40 years of friendship is its own kind of credential. He understood now what the restructuring had actually been. The hospital discharged him at 11 in the morning. Simone drove. She did not say very much on the way home, which was fine, because Bernard did not want to talk about Thomas yet. He wanted to sit with the city moving past the window and think about all the places he had seen Thomas's particular kind of patience. In depositions, in negotiations, across restaurant tables, in the careful way he had recommended the gold-rimmed glass to the catering staff. Who would never have questioned the request of a retiring partner's closest colleague? He had known about the evening's timeline. He had known about the glass. He had planned the one moment where the room's attention would be fixed on Bernard. A toast, a speech, 50 people raising their own glasses, and he had arranged for Bernard's glass to be the only one that mattered. Except for a 7-year-old girl who had come to look at the pretty table. The RCMP concluded their investigation 8 weeks later. The substance in the glass was identified as a synthetic compound that interacted specifically and dangerously with the anticoagulant Bernard had been prescribed. Thomas's internet search history produced 14 queries over the preceding 4 months, several of which were specific enough that the Crown prosecutor, when she reviewed the file, said she had rarely seen a case where the digital evidence was so thorough. Catherine Wren had been the one to source the compound. She had a contact. A former client from a civil case Thomas had handled 15 years ago, a man who had since moved into pharmaceutical manufacturing of a less regulated kind. She had met with him twice. The second meeting was photographed by a surveillance camera outside a parking garage on Elgin Street. The equity restructuring was unwound by court order within 60 days. The documents Thomas had presented as tax instruments were found to have been drafted with the specific intention of consolidating firm control in the event of Bernard's sudden incapacitation or death. Two junior associates who had been asked to notarize signatures they had not witnessed were interviewed under caution. Bernard sat in his study on the morning the final confirmation came through and felt something he had not expected. Not satisfaction, not relief, not even the simple animal comfort of being alive. He felt tired, in the particular way that comes from learning that a thing you built with someone was never entirely what you thought it was. He called Simone. She was already on her way from Halifax. Then he called Priya Sandhu. Priya answered on the second ring, sounding like a woman who had been waiting for the call but was not going to admit it. "Mr. Harlow," she said. "Mrs. Sandhu," he said. "I need to speak with Nina." A brief pause. Then Nina's voice came on, cautious and careful. "Hello? Nina. It's Bernard Harlow." "I know." A pause. "Are you calling because the case is done?" "I am," he said, "and because I owe you something." Another pause. He could hear her thinking. "You don't owe me anything," she said finally. "You were nice to me at the hospital." "I want to do something for you," he said, "and I have already discussed it with your mother, so this is not a surprise to her. I'd like to set up a fund for your education, through to university and beyond, if you choose it." The line was quiet for long enough that Bernard checked to make sure the call had not dropped. "That's a lot," Nina said at last. "Yes," he agreed. "Because I was looking at the table," she said. "I wasn't trying to do anything brave, I know," Bernard said. "That's the part that matters most." There was another silence, and then she said, with the careful fairness of a child who is genuinely thinking it through, "Okay. Thank you, Mr. Harlow. Thank you, Nina." He had one more call to make that morning, to the club manager at the Rideau, to formally resign his membership. Not because the club had done anything wrong, but because rooms hold what happened in them, and he did not need to walk back into that dining room for the rest of his life. And see the east wall, the drinks cart, and the empty space where a gold-rimmed glass had sat waiting for him. On the first Saturday of November, Priya brought Nina to Bernard's house on Island Park Drive for lunch. Nina wore the same green dress she had worn the night of the party, because, as she explained to her mother on the way over, she wanted Mr. Harlow to remember who she was. He remembered. They ate soup and bread at the kitchen table, which Simone had laid with the everyday dishes, not the good ones, because she had decided correctly that this was not an occasion for anything formal. Nina ate 2 full bowls and told Bernard with great seriousness that she was currently learning about the Canadian court system at school, and that she had several questions. Bernard answered all of them. After lunch, Simone showed Nina the view from the upstairs study, which looked out over the river and on clear days all the way to Gatineau. Nina stood at the window for a long time, her nose almost touching the glass. "It's very big," she said. "It is," Simone agreed. "My mom says Ottawa is a good city if you know where to look." "Your mom is right." Nina considered this. Then she turned from the window and looked up at Simone with the frank directness that Bernard had come to think of as her particular signature. "Is your dad going to be okay now?" she asked. "Not just the medicine, the other part." Simone looked at her for a moment. "I think he's going to be better than okay," she said. "I think he's going to be different, in a good way." Nina nodded, as though this was the answer she had been waiting for, and went back to looking at the river. Downstairs, Bernard sat at the kitchen table across from Priya, both of them holding their cups of tea, and the afternoon light came through the side window and made the room feel like the kind of quiet that follows something difficult and arrives, eventually, as something close to peace. Priya did not say much. She was not the kind of woman who filled silences with words that didn't need to be there. After a while, Bernard said, "I keep thinking about the moment I put the glass down." Priya looked at him. "I don't know why I did it," he said. "I had been about to drink it. I had it in my hand. And then Nina spoke, and I put it down." He paused. "I've been trying to understand whether I believed her immediately, or whether I was just startled." Priya thought about it. "Does it matter which one it was?" Bernard considered that. "No," he said finally. "I suppose it doesn't." She nodded once and looked out the window, and they finished their tea, and upstairs Nina was still watching the river, and the afternoon was still clear, and in a courthouse across the city, 2 people who had spent 30 years learning how to read a room had finally, in the end, been read by a 7-year-old in a green dress who had only come to look at the pretty table.